When you cross in between worlds as frequently as I have, you come across a lot of eras where a world comes apart totally at the seams. Never was this more glaringly true than on one such world, known as Earth, during what its historians called the Crisis of the Third Century. But we're not talking about the crisis of the Third Century where most historians gloss over. Admittedly, it's one of the more intriguing and story-worthy aspects of what was known as the Roman Empire. Instead, I want to talk about the Roman Republic's younger dragon brother that was separated by about 100 years and two major stretches of land known as the Middle East and a place known as India. This younger dragon brother is known by a more renowned title, the Han Dynasty. Stretching from roughly 400 AD to 220 AD, the Han Dynasty's crisis of the 3rd century is just about as interesting as Rome's. Tell me, all of you observers, and specifically my fellow observers interested in Rome, if this sounds familiar at all. A peasant from some backwater nowhere decides one day that his nation needs him. He serves diligently in a form of military, and rises through the ranks. When he's in his 50s or 60s, is called upon by his nation to rise up and wear the golden crown of majesty. With a sword in hand, he rides out to save his nation from certain doom. Lurking in the midst, however, disaster still threatens to bring down all they've worked for. Only but a single wrong move would be all it takes to rip his land back into chaos, disorder, and war. In the end, history remembers them as a man who was a valiant hero, whose patriotism and honor is remembered eternally in the minds of every man who knows about them, like an ethereal ascending from beyond mortality to enshrine themselves as a reminder of just why honor is such a sacred fruit to men. If you thought I was talking about a certain legend born either between Dacia or Macedonia, in traditional Latin anyway, you're wrong on today's topic, but you're not far off. I'm talking about Liobe today, a man born quite a few decades before Aurelian, but was surprisingly still alive when Aurelian was. There's a reason why I consider the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire to be brothers, and that's one of them. The two nations lived and died almost together. Today, observer, I intend to give you an invitation to the Three Kingdoms. A full warning, though, I'm going to mispronounce names. Comes with the territory, but my pronunciation will be mediocre, so if you're a stickler for correct pronunciation, this video should at least be tolerable. If not, I'm sorry to have lost your attention, and I hope you have a great day. In my time, I've come across movies, TV shows, books, games, and comics. You even have a spaghetti western Three Kingdoms movie, and don't tell me it isn't. Don't sit there and tell me that that isn't a spaghetti western in a Han Dynasty jacket. I even recall a few webcomics out there, one namely known as A Farmer's Tale of the Three Kingdoms. Admittedly, it's been on hiatus for a little bit now, but what can you do? Most famously, the Three Kingdoms era is known primarily due to the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel, which tends to include a lot of old Chinese metaphors and possible feats of strength. And I am pretty sure that it was a propaganda piece made to stir up rebellion against the monarchy during that time, but that's personal speculation. Considering the excessively long time frame this story goes over, nearly 100 years worth of content, I plan to keep this whole series packed with action, and keep it digestible since there's enough here to get a headache over. So since I've already described Liobe during my bait and switch earlier, we can just go ahead and jump right into the good stuff. Starting where? Where every sensible person starts it. With three doctors proclaiming themselves as the generals of heaven, man, and earth. These doctors proclaim the azure sky is dead, the yellow sky rises. When the year has reached a full cycle, there will be prosperity under heaven. Which goes hard, I'm not gonna lie. This proclamation did wonders for them, and so did healing the sick and caring for the people who were starving. About this time, just about every disaster on the planet decided it wanted to take a piece of the Han Dynasty's lifespan. And if it wasn't Mother Nature herself, it was the Han Dynasty's government, which basically just figured, nah, it'll be fine. And just opted to pretend none of this was happening. However, there were still loyalists. That or just people who figured they might get a few slices of bread off the nobility if they risked their life and neck on behalf of it. Well, that didn't work. Turned out the Oturbans had hands, and were giving the Han Dynasty's army the boxing match of its life. Stuck between a rock and a Han place, the Han Dynasty decided to lop off its own arm and empower the local warlords to handle the problem. It's during this utter disaster that Mr. Liu decides to find a couple of like-minded individuals in his hometown and figures that it would be a great idea to jump in and get a piece of that pie. Professing his loyalty to the Han Dynasty, which I personally believe he was actually loyal, but he set out with a group of volunteers. Which, honestly, without the novel's version of the story, I wonder exactly how he got that money to do that. As far as I know, though, he basically just did what all good leaders did back then, and I guess he just sort of summoned them out of the ether, and then went on his way. Included amongst them was Guan Yu, Zhong Fei, and a guy who routinely gets left out of history, Zhang Yong. Poor Zhang Yong. Guy was probably one of Liu Bei's closest friends, and history just casually forgets about him. Liu Bei and his militia got to participate in a bit of the fighting, liberate a few towns, and soon he found himself in a very unique position, where everyone else was. See, when the war did come to an end and the Yellow Turbans were defeated, the Han Dynasty realized something. That the Yellow Turban might have hit the Han Dynasty with the world's gnarliest martyrdom. Because the Han Dynasty began to look around and said to itself, wait a moment. If we actually honor our promises, we're actually going to have to honor our promises. And with the tact of a ballet dancer, they told everyone that wasn't already a significant warlord to bend themselves, because they would get the equivalent of a thank you note at the best of times, and a red message at the mediocre cases. Liu Bei, for his troubles, got a fat go away. In reply, Liu Bei stiffened his lips, and reminded the Han Dynasty that he still fought in the war, and that they had a promise to keep. The eunuchs, figuring it was beginning to become a actual annoyance, decided to give Liu Bei a small town and told him to shove off for a while. Once there, Liu Bei got himself settled in. He immediately got to work, helping the people out, getting the town running smoothly, and for his trouble he was promptly told to leave, and that his titles were revoked by the Han government. Liu Bei didn't think this was real, and the government sent an inspector whose job it was to, well, inspect the prefecture. To Liu Bei, this was a great way to learn if he still had a job. So he rushed on over and got told by the inspector, I'm sick, go away. Liu Bei, handling this in a calm and collected way, gathered up a few county clerics and soldiers and stopped by the inspector's house. Politely and well-mannered, Liu Bei broke down his door, dragged the man out by his heels, and proclaimed that he was given a secret decree to arrest the inspector, and so he would tie up the government inspector in front of everyone and began to lash the man over 100 times with a bamboo stick. In the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel, this was Zhong Fei who did this in a drunken rage. But history is often rather different. The inspector, now seemingly a little bit worried for his life, decided now it would be a really good time to panic, and so he begged for his life. Liu Bei relented, allowing the inspector to not only live, but go down as no one. He's never brought up again in history, as far as I'm aware. He just sort of got left out, I guess. As for our favorite Liu Bei, he thought for a moment and realized this probably ensured he didn't have a job anymore. So he packed up his bags and along with all his trusty buddies and tag-alongs, he fled the countryside. But that's not the end of Liu Bei. See, our little scoundrel here is a lot like his ancestor, Liu Bang. Just when it appears like their story is over and that it's a wrap, Liu Bei decides he wants to run it back and go again. But we can get into that another time. If you're interested in this series of just chatting about things I found interesting in this Earth's history, let me know. If not, I'm always happy you stuck with me through the story, and I appreciate your patience. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll meet again soon.